Imagine sitting down at a fancy restaurant, thinking you're meeting the man of your dreams, only to realize you've mistaken him for someone else. Emma Brooks thought her blind date was a disaster, but little did she know, it was only the beginning of a whirlwind romance that would change her life forever. What happens when a small mistake leads to an unexpected love story? Can trust be rebuilt after a lie? Join Emma and Liam on a journey of forgiveness, self-discovery, and a love that defies all expectations. You won't believe what happens next. The wind shrieked through the valley, its icy claws slicing through the air with a vengeance. Snowflakes danced wildly, sharp as tiny daggers, stinging Emily Dawson's cheeks as she battled through the knee-deep snow. Her boots sank with every grueling step. Could this cold get any worse? The sky loomed above, a brooding gray that screamed an approaching blizzard. She yanked her tattered coat tighter, muttering curses at the chill that clawed its way into her bones. Why did winter have to be so brutal? Emily had wandered farther from her cabin than she ever dared, driven by a desperate need to gather firewood before the night swallowed the light. The forest at the mountain's base was deathly quiet, save for the eerie moans of wind wrestling with the towering pines. She shifted the axe on her back, her breath puffing out in frosty clouds. Then, out of nowhere, a sound stopped her cold, a faint, guttural moan, barely louder than the howling wind. Her heart raced. Did she imagine it? But there it was again, weak and laced with pain. What was that? Her eyes scanned the snowy wasteland, searching frantically. The sound was close, but the wind's screams made it impossible to pinpoint. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Silence answered. Emily's instincts roared someone was in trouble. She hesitated only a heartbeat before plunging forward, her boots crunching through the icy snow. Then, through the thick white veil blanketing the ground, she spotted it, a dark shape, nearly buried under a mound of snow. Her stomach lurched. What could it be? Her heart pounded as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the figure, frantically brushing away the snow. Her breath caught. Oh my God! It was a man. His face was ghostly pale, dark hair frozen at the edges. His clothes, clearly expensive, were torn and soaked, clinging to his shivering frame. His lips were almost blue, his eyes barely open. "Hey, can you hear me?" Emily shook his shoulder, her voice urgent. No response, just a faint twitch. "Sir, wake up," she pleaded. A weak groan slipped from his lips, his fingers trembling, as if fighting the cold's deadly embrace. Emily leaned closer, her voice firm but shaking. "You need to wake up. You'll die out here." His lips parted, and she held her breath, hoping for words. But all that came was a raspy whisper, "Help." Her jaw tightened. She scanned him quickly. His leg was twisted horribly, blood staining the snow beneath. A broken leg in this blizzard? He wouldn't survive an hour. Swearing under her breath, she grabbed his arm, trying to haul him up. He was heavy, like dragging a sack of bricks through the snow. "Come on," she grunted, slinging his arm over her shoulder. "I'm not leaving you here. No way." With every ounce of strength she had, Emily hoisted him up, nearly buckling under his weight. Each step was a war against the deep snow and the wind that sliced through her coat like a knife. The man groaned, his head sagging against her shoulder, pain etched into his every sound. Who was this guy? How did he end up here? None of that mattered now, only getting him to safety before the cold claimed him for good. Emily staggered through the snow, clutching the unconscious stranger tightly. The cold was merciless, numbing her limbs, but she refused to give up. His breaths were shallow, his body limp against hers. She couldn't let him die, not on her watch. By the time her cabin came into view, her muscles screamed with exhaustion. She kicked the door open with a desperate heave, nearly collapsing as she dragged him inside. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave, a stark contrast to the frozen wilderness outside. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. With a groan, she maneuvered him onto the old couch by the fireplace. His body was ice cold, his fingers stiff with frostbite. Oh, how long had he been out there? She grabbed a pile of blankets, wrapping them around him before kneeling to check his injuries. His face was gaunt, but his features were sharp, almost regal. Even in this state, his fancy coat was shredded, stiff with frozen blood. Her eyes fell to his leg. A deep, angry gash ran along his shin, raw against his pale skin. Emily cursed. If that got infected, he was done for. Her hands moved fast, steady, despite the panic clawing at her chest. She cleaned the wound with warm water, wincing at the sight of the jagged cut. He stirred, a faint groan escaping, but his eyes stayed shut. After wrapping his leg tightly with bandages, she let out a shaky breath. All she could do now was wait. Would he even make it? Hours dragged by. Emily sat in the creaky wooden chair across from the couch, her eyes locked on the stranger. His breathing had steadied, his face no longer deathly pale. The firelight played over his features, highlighting the stubble on his jaw, the strong lines of his face. He didn't look like he belonged here. Who was this guy? What was he doing in the middle of nowhere, dressed like some city hotshot? Suddenly, a hoarse voice shattered the silence. "Where am I?" Emily jumped, rushing to his side. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing stormy gray eyes that darted around in confusion. "You're in my cabin," she said, keeping her tone calm but firm. "I found you half dead in the snow." "You're lucky to be alive," he groaned, his hand drifting to his temple, like he was trying to piece together a broken puzzle. I don't remember anything." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What's your name?" He hesitated, blinking against the firelight, then rasped, Richard Caldwell." The name tickled something in her memory, but she couldn't place it. "You were in rough shape," she said, crossing her arms. "Your legs a mess. And you had no gear, no supplies. What the heck happened to you?" Richard exhaled sharply, wincing as he tried to sit up. Pain flashed across his face, and he gripped his bandaged leg. "I don't know. I remember the cold, the storm." He shook his head, frustration darkening his eyes. "It's all a blur. Why can't I remember?" Emily studied him, unsure if he was hiding something or truly lost. Either way, something about this didn't feel right. Then his face twisted in alarm. "My phone," he muttered, frantically patting his torn coat. "My wallet, where are they?" Emily's stomach knotted. "They weren't on you when I found you." Richard's jaw clenched. No, I had them. My phone, my wallet, my watch, they're gone." A heavy silence hung between them. Emily knew what this meant. In the brutal Alaskan wilderness, things didn't just disappear. Someone had taken them. "You think someone robbed you?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard let out a bitter laugh. "What else could it be? Someone left me out there to die." Emily frowned, her mind racing. If someone had stripped him of his belongings and abandoned him, they wanted him gone for good. But why? She glanced at the fire, its flames flickering like her swirling thoughts. Richard Caldwell, with his fancy clothes and piercing eyes, didn't belong here. Something about him screamed trouble, yet the knot in her gut wouldn't let her turn him away. Not yet. Could she trust him? Morning light seeped through the frosted windows, casting a soft glow over the humble cabin. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, crackling faintly in the stillness. Emily moved with practiced ease, stacking wood in the stove and setting a kettle over the flames. The air carried the comforting scent of pine and smoked meat home. In all its simplicity, a rustle of blankets made her turn. Richard was stirring, his movements stiff as he winced, adjusting his injured leg. His face still held the pallor of near death, but his gray eyes were sharper now, locking onto her with a new alertness. "You're awake," she said, setting down the tin cup in her hand. He nodded, running a hand over his face, as if trying to shake off a lingering nightmare. "Yeah, I owe you big time for not leaving me out there." "I'd be a popsicle by now," Emily scoffed, pouring hot water into the cup and walking over. "You're not wrong. You'd be frozen solid." She handed him the cup. "Drink this. It'll warm you up." Richard eyed the steaming liquid warily. "What's this supposed to be?" "Pine needle tea," she said with a smirk, catching his skeptical look. "No fancy lattes here. City boy? Drink it or freeze." At City Boy, Richard shot her a half-amused glance, but stayed quiet. He sipped the tea, grimacing at the bitter taste, but swallowing it down. Was he actually starting to trust her? The cabin door creaked open, and a gust of icy air swept in as an elderly woman stepped inside, bundled in thick furs that made her look like a warrior from the wild. Her piercing blue eyes zeroed in on Richard, sizing him up with a gaze that could cut through steel. "So, this is the stranger you dragged in from the snow, huh?" she said, her voice dripping with curiosity and a hefty dose of skepticism. Emily straightened, her chin lifting defiantly. "Grandma, meet Richard." "Richard, this is Martha Dawson." Richard nodded, struggling to sit up straighter despite the ache in his leg. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but weak. Martha just hummed, stepping closer, her eyes raking over him like she was reading his soul. "He shouldn't be here, Emily," she declared, turning to her granddaughter. Why did she sound so sure? Emily crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "I couldn't just leave him to die out there, Grandma." "What was I supposed to do?" Martha sighed, untying her fur-lined hood with slow, deliberate movements. "You're too soft-hearted, child. Strangers bring trouble, always have." Emily bit back a retort, her eyes flashing. She knew Martha wasn't cruel, just hardened by the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. But Emily had made her choice, and she wasn't backing down. "He's staying until he's strong enough to leave," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Martha exhaled sharply through her nose, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't push further. Instead, she shuffled to the stove, her movements slow but precise, as she started preparing breakfast. Could Emily really trust this stranger? Richard watched in silence, his gaze drifting over the humble cabin. The walls were lined with shelves crammed with jars of preserved food, their contents glowing softly in the firelight. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a faint, earthy scent. A couple of old hunting rifles leaned near the door, their wooden stocks worn smooth from years of use. The cabin was simple, yet it radiated warmth, not just from the fire, but from the quiet, unspoken bond between Emily and Martha. How did they make this rugged life feel so comforting? The smell of food hit Richard like a wave, and his stomach growled so loudly he was sure they heard it. He hadn't realized how ravenous he was until now. Emily caught the look on his face and smirked. "Haven't eaten in a while, have you?" she teased. Richard frowned, his brow furrowing. "Not since. I don't even know. My memory's a mess." "Well, you're in luck," Emily said with a grin. "Breakfast is almost ready." Moments later, Martha set 3 wooden bowls on the table, the steam rising from a thick stew that looked like it could bring a bear back to life. It was made of dried venison, root vegetables, and wild herbs, nothing fancy, just hearty, rustic food that smelled like heaven. Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the wooden spoon. Was this really his life now? He took a bite, and the hot, rich flavors exploded on his tongue, deep, earthy, and slow-cooked to perfection. This wasn't the overpriced nonsense of five-star restaurants or the bland, processed junk of city life. This was real, soul-warming, and nourishing in a way that had nothing to do with money. He glanced at Emily, who ate with her usual quiet efficiency. How did she make everything look so effortless? "You live like this every day?" he asked, unable to hide his awe. Emily looked up, her spoon pausing. "Like what? Hunting for food, brewing your own medicine, chopping wood just to stay warm?" She shrugged. "Yeah, it's tough, but it's life." "What else is there?" Richard shook his head, stirring his stew absent-mindedly. "I don't think I've ever had to work that hard for anything." "Ever?" Martha snorted, her eyes glinting. "Doesn't surprise me one bit." Richard chuckled softly, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I bet it doesn't." Emily watched him for a moment, her gaze lingering. There was something so strange about seeing this man clearly born into wealth, sitting at their worn table, eating their simple stew. He was a fish out of water, yet the way he stared at his bowl, like he was rethinking his entire existence, made her wonder, was he as lost as he seemed, or was there more to him? The days in the Dawson cabin crawled by, marked by the steady crackle of the fire and the muffled howls of the wind outside. Richard's strength was creeping back, though his injured leg still kept him from moving much. Despite the pain, he felt oddly at peace in this quiet, unassuming place. Emily was a whirlwind of activity, chopping wood, checking traps, cooking, and looking after Martha without a single complaint. She dove into every task with a grit that left Richard in awe. Who was this woman, and how was she so fearless? One evening, as the fire glowed warmly in the hearth, Richard sat up on the couch, stretching his aching limbs. The room smelled of pine and smoke, a scent he now linked to safety, to home. Emily sat at the small wooden table, meticulously sewing a tear in her coat, her fingers deft and sure. "I need to tell you something," he said, breaking the silence. Emily didn't look up, her needle pausing. "You're not a secret murderer, are you?" she quipped, a playful edge to her voice. Richard let out a small laugh. "No, but I am rich. Like, really rich." That got her attention. She glanced up, one eyebrow arched. He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "My full name's Richard Caldwell. I own Caldwell Enterprises Real Estate, private investments, the works. I've got offices in New York, London, Tokyo." Emily blinked, unfazed. "Okay." Richard waited for a gasp, a question, anything, but she just shrugged and went back to sewing. "That's it?" he asked, incredulous. "You're not even a little shocked?" She didn't bother looking up this time. "What do you want me to say, Richard?" "I don't know," he said, gesturing wildly. Most people would be floored. Emily tied off the thread, biting it with her teeth before meeting his gaze. "It doesn't change a thing." Richard stared, utterly baffled. "You're telling me you don't care at all?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Look, Richard, in your world, money might be everything, but here, it won't light a fire, it won't fill your belly, and it sure as hell won't save you from freezing to death in a snowstorm." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but she wasn't done. "Out there, you might be some hotshot millionaire," she said, waving vaguely toward the world beyond the cabin. "But here, you're just a guy who got lost in the snow. That's it." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. His whole life, people had bowed to his wealth, employees, friends, even lovers. His name alone opened doors, commanded respect. But Emily? She didn't care one bit. For the first time, Richard felt something new. Humility. He sank back against the couch, staring into the fire. His thoughts a tangled mess. Was everything he'd built his life on wrong? Emily stood, stretching with a yawn. I'm hitting the sack. Don't overthink it, city boy, she teased, disappearing into the small room next door. Richard watched her go, alone with his swirling thoughts. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been living his life all wrong. The morning air was crisp, biting at his skin, thick with the scent of pine and fresh snow. Richard stepped outside, leaning against the cabin's wooden railing, his eyes drinking in the vast wilderness. Towering mountains loomed against a pale blue sky, their snowy peaks untouched by time. This wasn't New York. This was a world that belonged to the earth itself. How had he never seen anything so breathtaking? Emily appeared from the side of the cabin, an old axe slung over her shoulder. She glanced at him, then at the dwindling firewood pile. If you're just gonna stand there, make yourself useful, she said, tossing him a pair of gloves. Richard caught them just before they smacked his chest. Chopping wood? Seriously? He groaned. Emily smirked. Unless you wanna freeze tonight, city boy. Richard sighed, pulling on the gloves. He'd brokered billion-dollar deals, run global companies, but chop wood? Never. Yet, as he followed Emily to the clearing, something stirred in him. For the first time, he wanted to try. Was he actually starting to like this? At first, Richard was awful. The axe felt like a lead weight, and his swings barely dented the logs. Emily watched, arms crossed, barely hiding her grin. You don't have to hit it like it tanked your stocks, she teased. Richard groaned, wiping sweat from his brow. Why don't you do it? Nope, she said, stepping closer. Here, fix your grip. Stand like this. Her calloused fingers guided his hands, warm and steady, adjusting his stance. Richard's breath caught, distracted by her closeness, the way the sunlight glinted off her wind-tousled hair. Now, try again, she said, stepping back. He focused, swung, and crack. The log split clean in two. Emily grinned. There you go. Richard stared at the pieces, a surge of pride swelling in his chest. It was a small win, but damn, it felt good. Maybe there was something to this hands-on life. After all, days passed, and Richard started to find his rhythm. He helped Emily fetch water from the frozen stream, patch the cabin's old roof, even set snares in the forest. His fancy suits were gone, replaced by thick woolen clothes from Emily's grandfather's trunk. His hands, once soft from signing contracts, were now rough from work, and strangely, he didn't mind one bit. Was this rugged life actually growing on him? One evening, as the fire crackled and cast a warm glow across the cabin, Emily handed Richard a bow, its wood smooth and weathered. "You're teaching me to hunt now?" he asked, his eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. Was she serious? Emily smirked, her eyes glinting with mischief. "You want to eat, don't you? Or are you planning to starve out here?" Richard sighed, shaking his head, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "Fine. But if I die doing this, you're explaining it to my board of directors." Emily's laughter rang out, bright and infectious, filling the cozy cabin. Oh, how could he resist that sound? The next morning, they ventured into the woods, the air sharp with the scent of fresh pine. Richard tried to mimic Emily's silent steps, but she moved like a ghost, graceful, deliberate, barely disturbing the snow. He, on the other hand, crunched every twig underfoot, wincing with each snap. How did she make it look so easy? They tracked a rabbit for nearly an hour, their breaths visible in the frosty air. When the moment came, Emily nudged him, her voice low. "All right, city boy, take your shot." Richard gripped the bow, his hands unsteady. The rabbit's ears twitched, sensing danger. His heart pounded. Could he actually do this? "Hesitate, and you lose," Emily whispered, her words a quiet challenge. Richard exhaled slowly, released the arrow, and whoosh, it sailed wide, missing by a mile. Emily winced, her face scrunching up. "Ouch, that was rough to watch." Richard groaned, rubbing his forehead. "Maybe I should stick to real estate deals." Her laughter echoed through the trees, warm and teasing. "Don't worry, we'll try again later. You'll get it." That afternoon, as they trekked back toward the cabin, the air suddenly shifted. The birds fell silent. The wind stilled, and an eerie hush blanketed the forest. Emily froze, her body tense. Richard frowned, his stomach twisting. "What's wrong?" he whispered. Before she could answer, a deep, guttural growl rumbled through the trees, chilling his blood to ice. Slowly, he turned, and his heart stopped. A massive grizzly bear lumbered from the underbrush, its dark eyes locking onto them. It was so close, too close, and absolutely enormous. Richard's breath caught, fear gripping him like never before. Was this it? Emily reacted first, her voice a hushed command. "Move back slowly." Richard obeyed, his pulse thundering in his ears, each step deliberate, but the bear huffed, its massive paws crunching the snow as it advanced. Then, without warning, it charged. Richard's mind blanked, panic seizing him, but Emily grabbed his arm, yanking him behind a tree with a strength that stunned him. In one swift motion, she raised her rifle and fired a warning shot. Bang, the sound shattering the silence like a thunderclap. The bear skidded to a halt, its ears flattening. It hesitated, glaring, then let out a final huff before turning and lumbering back into the woods. Richard's hands shook as he clung to the tree, gasping for air. Emily lowered her gun, exhaling slowly, her calm unshaken. "That," Richard panted, his voice trembling, "was the most terrifying thing I've ever faced." Emily slung the rifle over her shoulder, a smirk playing on her lips. "Welcome to Alaska, city boy." Richard let out a shaky laugh, his nerves still rattled, but something had shifted deep within him. Emily had risked her life for him without a second thought. No one, not his business partners, not his exes, not even his so-called friends, had ever done that. But Emily, this woman who barely knew him, had saved him. How could he ever repay her? In that moment, Richard Caldwell, billionaire CEO, realized something profound. All the wealth in the world paled compared to this raw, selfless act of courage. The fire's crackle filled the cabin, a comforting hum against the howling wind that battered the shutters outside. Richard sat at the wooden table, staring at his hands, lost in thought. His mind churned, piecing together the fragmented memories of how he'd ended up in that snowdrift. Emily sat across from him, sipping pine needle tea, her green eyes studying him with quiet curiosity. "You look like you just solved a puzzle," she said, setting her cup down. What was he thinking? Richard exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I think I figured out why I was out there, why I almost died." Emily leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "Tell me." He took a slow breath, the weight of the truth settling on him. "Before I woke up in the snow, I was in Alaska for a business meeting. My company, Caldwell Enterprises, was closing a deal to buy a gold mine, one of the last untouched reserves in the region, worth billions." Emily's eyes narrowed. "A gold mine? Seriously?" Richard nodded, his voice heavy. "We'd been negotiating for months. It was a big deal." Her expression darkened, suspicion flickering in her gaze. "Let me guess, the deal wasn't exactly on the up and up, was it?" Richard hesitated, guilt prickling at him. Truth be told, he'd never questioned the ethics of his deals before. He had teams for that. But now, in this simple cabin, seeing the world through Emily's honest eyes, it all felt different. The negotiations were cutthroat. He admitted, not everyone wanted me to get that mine. Other investors, competitors, they'd profit if I was out of the picture. Emily leaned closer, her voice sharp. You think someone tried to kill you? Richard's jaw clenched, the realization hitting him like a freight train. Not just someone, my own assistant. The words burned his throat. Jonathan Reed, his right-hand man, the one who managed his schedule, his travel, his security, the one he trusted above all, had been the last person he saw before the world went dark. Memories flashed like jagged shards. A private meeting in a luxurious lodge near Fairbanks. Jonathan by the fireplace, reviewing documents. Everything's set, Jonathan had said, pouring Richard a drink with a smooth smile. By tomorrow, the mine's yours. Richard had nodded, sipping the drink. Good. No surprises. Jonathan's smile had widened. You can always trust me. Then nothing. A sharp pain in his skull, a bitter taste on his tongue, and the freezing bite of snow. Richard's fists clenched, his knuckles white. He drugged me, left me out there to die. By the time they'd call me missing, the deal would have gone through without me. Emily's face hardened, disgust flashing in her eyes. He tried to kill you for money? That's sick. Richard let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. That's the world I live in. Emily shook her head, her voice laced with contempt. Unbelievable. And you trusted this snake? Richard's shoulders sagged, shame creeping in. Yeah, I did. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. I can't let him get away with this. Not after what he did. Emily studied system. Emily studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. So, what are you gonna do about it? Richard looked up, his gray eyes blazing with determination. I have to go back. A heavy silence fell, thick with unspoken tension. Emily leaned back, crossing her arms. Right. Back to your world of power and money, huh? Richard frowned, a pang of unease hitting him. I don't have a choice. Emily, if I don't stop him, he'll take everything I've built. He'll win. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And then what? You fix your business, lock up the bad guy, and go back to your swanky New York penthouse? Richard hesitated, her words stinging. He hadn't thought that far ahead. His focus was on justice. But now, looking at Emily, at this life he'd grown to admire, a strange ache settled in his chest. Did he really want to leave? Emily sighed, shaking her head. I get it. You've got unfinished business. But don't forget what you've learned here, okay? Richard met her gaze, and for the first time, he realized leaving wasn't what he wanted, not really. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, warm and tentative. I'll come back, Emily. I promise. She searched his face, looking for any hint of deceit. Then, with a single nod, she said, You better. And in that moment, Richard knew he'd found something worth more than any fortune or reason to return. The day Richard left, the sky was a heavy, brooding gray, thick clouds draping the mountains like a shroud. The air felt colder than ever. Or maybe it was just Emily's heart as she stood outside the cabin, watching him prepare to go. He wore borrowed winter gear, bundled against the chill, but something about him seemed distant, like he no longer fit in this wild place. His leg had healed enough to travel, though he limped slightly. The sled dogs yipped eagerly, their breaths puffing in the frosty air. Emily crossed her arms, forcing a neutral expression. You sure you're ready for this, city boy? She asked, her voice teasing but tight. Richard smirked, though sadness shadowed his eyes. Do I have a choice? She exhaled, her breath a fleeting cloud. Guess not. Martha, standing nearby, fixed him with a stern glare. Watch yourself out there, boy. The world's not as kind as this place. Richard nodded solemnly. I know. He turned to Emily, hesitating, 1,000 unsaid words hanging between them. Instead, he reached into his coat and pressed something small into her hand, a silver compass, worn with age. Emily frowned, turning it over. What's this? My grandfather's, Richard said softly. He said it always pointed him home. She looked up, her eyes locking with his. And where's home for you, Richard? His gaze softened, vulnerable. I don't know yet, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. What did that mean? Emily's throat tightened as she clutched the silver compass, its worn edges pressing into her palm. You better figure it out, Richard, she said, her voice fierce but trembling. A heavy silence hung between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, with a final glance, Richard stepped back and climbed onto the sled. With a sharp whistle, the dog surged forward, kicking up a wild flurry of snow. Emily stood frozen, her heart aching, as she watched him vanish into the white horizon. For the first time since she was a little girl, a strange, terrifying feeling gripped her stronger than any blizzard. She missed him already. How could someone she barely knew leave such a void? The weeks dragged on, slow and relentless. Emily threw herself into her chores, hunting through the icy woods, chopping firewood until her arms burned, fixing whatever needed mending. She told herself she didn't care, that Richard hadn't sent word. Why should she? But every morning, her eyes betrayed her, darting to the trail where he'd left, hoping for a sign. At night, she sat by the fire, turning the small silver compass over in her fingers, as if its needle could point to answers. What did it mean to him? Martha noticed. Of course, he's not coming back, child, her grandmother said one evening, stirring a pot of stew with a knowing look. Emily kept her gaze down, her jaw tight. I never said he was, Martha sighed, shaking her head. You like him, don't you? Emily scoffed, but her cheeks warmed. Doesn't matter. His world's out there. Mine's here. Martha's eyes softened. But what if his world isn't what he wants anymore? Emily froze. What if he really had changed? Then, one crisp evening, everything shifted. Emily was outside, stacking firewood under the fading light, when the distant yips of sled dogs pierced the quiet. Her heart skipped another traitor. She turned, but instead, a tall stranger stepped off the sled, his heavy fur-lined coat marking him as an outsider. His sharp features didn't belong in these wilds. He pulled a sealed envelope from his pocket. Miss Dawson? He asked. Emily nodded, her pulse racing. He handed her the letter. This is from Richard Caldwell. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hesitated, the cold paper stiff in her hands. The man nodded. He's waiting for you. Emily's breath caught. Richard hadn't forgotten her. Now, it was her turn to choose where she belonged. Could she really leave her world behind? New York City hit Emily like a tidal wave, lights blazing, skyscrapers clawing at the sky, and streams of people rushing like rivers through the streets. The honking horns, the flashing billboards, it was too much. She gripped the silver compass in her pocket, her anchor to the quiet Alaskan wilderness. A sleek black car whisked her from the airport, weaving through the chaos, until it stopped at a towering hotel, its glass facade gleaming. The doorman offered a nod, but Emily barely saw him, her eyes fixed on the massive structure. Did Richard really live here? The elevator to the penthouse hummed softly, her stomach twisting with every floor. Then, the doors slid open. Richard stood there, and time stopped. Neither spoke. Their eyes locked. He looked different, polished in a tailored suit, clean-shaven, every inch the billionaire. But his eyes, they held a softness she hadn't seen before, a warmth that made her heart stutter. "Emily," he said, stepping closer. She swallowed hard, steadying herself. "You wrote to me." He nodded, his exhale heavy with relief. "I promised I'd come back. When I couldn't, I had to bring you here." Emily glanced around the penthouse marble floors, windows framing the glittering city. It was another world, one she didn't fit into. Richard sensed her unease and stepped closer. "I know it's overwhelming," he admitted, "but I didn't bring you here to show off. I swear." She crossed her arms. "Then why am I here, Richard?" He took a slow breath, his voice earnest. "To show you who I was and who I'm trying to be." Over the next few days, Emily saw the change in him. He'd fired Jonathan Reed, pressed charges, and taken back his company. But more than that, he'd started something new. "The Dawson Initiative," he explained over dinner, his eyes bright. "A nonprofit for rural communities, like Alaska roads, clinics, schools, real change." Emily blinked, stunned. "You named it after me?" Richard's smile was soft. "I wouldn't be alive without you, Emily." She searched his face for any hint of a ploy, but found only raw sincerity. Could he really mean it? One night, strolling along Central Park's edge, Richard stopped, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I love you, Emily." Her breath hitched, her heart pounding. He took her hands, his touch warm against the chilly air. "I don't care about the money, the company, none of it. I just want you." Emily's pulse raced, but doubt lingered. She'd seen powerful men make promises they couldn't keep, blind to life beyond their world. She wouldn't be a trophy. "If you love me, Richard, prove it," she challenged, holding up the compass. His brows furrowed. "How?" "Find your way home." Weeks later, Emily returned to Alaska, unsure if he'd follow, but he did not with jets or suits, but as a man hungry to learn. He spent months in her village, working beside her, embracing the land and its people. He chopped wood, hauled water, even tried hunting, still awful at it. But Emily saw the truth. This wasn't a game. He'd changed. One evening, under the northern lights' shimmering dance, Richard turned to her, his voice steady. "Emily, can I stay?" She looked at him, the man who'd been lost, betrayed, yet rebuilt himself with purpose, not wealth. A man who'd found home. She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Yeah," she whispered, "you can stay." As the lights glowed above, Emily knew this was just the start. Richard found more than riches. He found love, purpose, a true home. Emily, who'd saved a stranger in the snow, had saved a soul searching for meaning. Together, they bridged wilderness and skyscrapers, proving true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the people by your side.